Our next presenter is Dr. Ted Olson. Dr. Olson is a professor of Appalachian Studies and Bluegrass, Old Time, and Roots Music Study at East Tennessee State University. Ted has been committed to the preservation, understanding, and interpretation of the history of Appalachia for 50 years and counting. He's the author of Blue Ridge Folklife, a study of Blue Ridge culture, and is a Grammy Award-nominated music historian. Olson is also editor of the music section for the Encyclopedia of Appalachia, and he has produced many documentary albums of Appalachian music, including compilations of recordings from the 1927 to 1928 Bristol sessions, which is in my car right now, the 1928 and 1929 Johnson City sessions, and the 1929 to 1930 Knoxville sessions. Ted's authored Doc's World, Traditional Plus, the book that accompanies the 4-CD compilation of recordings of Doc's early career by Kraft Records called Doc Watson, Life's Work, a retrospective. The book garnered Olson the 2022 International Bluegrass Music Association Industry Award for Best Liner Notes and a special recognition from the ASCAP Foundation Paul Williams, quote, Loved the Liner Notes Award. Ted was nominated for 2 2023 Grammy Awards for the book, including Best Album Notes and Best Historical Recording, alongside Scott Billington and Mason Williams as compilation producers and Paul Blakemore as mastering engineer. So if everyone could please welcome Dr. Olson to the stage.
Thank you. And I'm sure you folks remember Paul Williams, the singer-songwriter of the early 70s. He wrote one of his great songs, We've Only Just Begun, so we've only just begun this presentation. So, I have been affiliated with this great organization, Partners for Sacred Places, for approximately 4 years now. And let's see, we'll get started here. Go back. Here we go. Partners for Sacred Places is based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but they do their work all over the country. What is Partners? Well, it's a long story, but Partners is a non-sectarian organization committed to celebrating and preserving historical sacred places. And the term sacred places is defined somewhat, I don't want to say loosely, but liberally in terms of a place where people gather to experience spirituality and community. Okay. Well, here's our project. Preserving Sacred Places in Central Appalachia. Partners for Sacred Places, as I said, is committed to helping preserve and encourage historical preservation in sacred places around the country. In 2019, they received some funding from the Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies to begin a project in Appalachia. And here we are in Central Appalachia, Southern Central, right on the cusp. But MACP has funded this project, and Partners is now undertaking its second cohort of service to churches in Appalachia. I'm going to be talking today about the project in general and focusing in on our first cohort, which is almost complete. But this is an ongoing project into at least 3 years into the future, folks. Just brief background about Partners. 1989, Partners was founded. Grew out of a meeting of leaders from New York, Philadelphia, Boston. You see up on the screen the different places, okay? So a select but committed group of leaders of historical preservation interested in helping churches around the country to engage in historical preservation. Some of that involves providing seed money for actual historical preservation work, but also it's very much about education, about enhancing people's awareness of the social and community values of their sacred places. Okay, you can see that the funding originally came from various foundations. And don't mean to slight any one of them, but there they are. Other organizations have provided funding ever since. Key themes of Partners' work. These are some just basic lessons learned over the years. Partners exist to help engage understanding in terms of care and maintenance of buildings, also how to use space and to enhance community engagement, recognizing the profound civic value of congregations, and that's an important theme, that we'll develop here. Also, encouraging awareness of fundraising. And our role in Central Appalachia, in part, was to try to help very small rural congregations learn how to raise funds for historical preservation. There is a tie-in to folk arts at the end, I can assure you. Okay. This is some research. Now, I've got some magazines up here. You're welcome to take a copy later, which provides some deep dives into the types of work that Partners for Sacred Places engages upon. But here's some general truths about the research conducted. As the organization entered the 90s, some questions were raised by the participants and the organizational leaders. Who exactly is served by the programs housed in sacred places? I mean, we all have a general sense of who's served, but research needed to be conducted to really make that clear and also make it something that was usable for future fundraising. Okay. Also, do congregations open their buildings sacrificially as well as through community enhancement? So, in other words, how exactly do buildings serve the spiritual needs of communities as well as their social needs? And then, of course, what cultural value do they bring to the community? And finally, do sacred places strengthen and stabilize their communities? I mean, what's it all about if it's not strengthening and stabilizing communities? So, large questions, important questions. Partners for Sacred Places has produced cutting-edge, groundbreaking research that's been made available to church leaders and other researchers through publications such as this very important publication, Sacred Places at Risk. This is one of several publications that Partners has produced over the years, and there are many others. And this was from 1998, so they've been doing it a long time. Okay, the question of who uses the building. The important point here, the 81% is non-members of a church community use any given church building. Why is that important? Because it illustrates the fact that churches exist to serve the community beyond the immediate congregation. Just a simple point, but it's a point that is overlooked often, and it needs to be understood. That is exactly why Partners wants to help churches of different denominations conduct historical preservation and stabilize the membership and the sense of community support towards a sacred place. It is because that sacred place serves many more people than simply the existing congregation. The existing congregation often is very small, but the number of people utilizing the church building might be quite large. Okay? I think we're missing a photo here, or some text. So some photos. We'll move along then. Oh, here we go. 93% of congregations open their doors to the community. Point being is that very few churches are closed-door communities. 93% have open-door policies serving the community. Here we go. 76% of their community service programs are housed in their own buildings. This is especially true in rural areas. Often it is a church that is, the community center, acts in almost, some certain kinds of, even perhaps in some communities, political gatherings, but that's not expressly, that's church by church decision. But beyond religious gatherings, they're community gatherings, and 76% of church communities open their buildings for that function, for public space gathering. The average congregation provides this many hours of volunteer support each year to its programs. That's a lot of hours, 5,300. So a lot of giving back to the community happens within a congregation that supports a sacred place. The annual subsidy provided by congregations to the community is over $140,000 per year. That's annual subsidy, and that's average over a test group of churches across the country. Okay, who the congregations serve most often. Now, if you look at the list here, these are essential ingredients of a healthy community providing help in these areas. clothing, food pantries, cultural events, partnerships with neighborhood groups to serve certain sectors of society, children and youth, people with basic needs. So these are issues, these are people served by sacred places. And we're all mindful of how important all this work is. Okay. Research and advocacy, the economic halo effect of sacred places. Now this is a concept that is very complex, and I'll just kind of introduce it. And if you want a deep dive into the concept, I would definitely encourage that you explore the website for Partners for Sacred Places, because they dedicate space on their website to defining and supporting the halo effect concept. But it's the halo effect of the ancillary contributions of sacred places in terms of their functionality and their contributions across the community. So a lot of local spending happens through a church community. Local hiring, a lot of hiring of craftspeople and specialists in terms of maintenance tasks are hired through churches. Visitor spending, tourism, a lot of tourism is encouraged by sacred places. We'll see some examples of that later in this slideshow. Activities that promote community economic development, tourism. Impact on individuals' lives. I mean, this is the point you can't ever overlook, is that the centerpiece of a lot of people's lives exists and emanates from a sacred place. Okay? Values inherent to older religious properties, green space and recreation space. People love to go to sacred places to find peace of mind, or possibly to visit graveyards where their loved ones may rest. So, for all these reasons, these church sacred places are essential for community health and happiness. Okay, let's see. Let's move on. Okay, just some numbers, folks. Findings from Philadelphia, Chicago, and Fort Worth. And this data is being updated yearly, so this is about a year ago. But we've got the average annual economic halo value per congregation. This much money, top line, is brought into the community, economically speaking, by the presence of that congregation in that community. Now, it's going to be different between urban churches and rural churches, as we'll soon see. I'm going to skip over this slide here in the interest of time, but there will be a slide to illustrate the rural to urban discrepancy of community funding, or halo effect. Number of visits of 90 congregations averaged out, or added together, I should say, 3,648,000, etc., and change. That's a lot of people served by 90 congregations, which are taken across a spectrum of churches. So it's just a lot of people. That's a number, but it's a large number, and that's the point, is that the number is extremely large. I think the bottom section, the pie chart there, is very interesting because it shows 4 major areas of contribution to the community. Nearly half are served, of those more than 3 million people, are served through community programs, a third of them through educational programs, 11% to worship benefit to people. Surprising, I think, a lot of times that churches are 11% at worship, and all these other factors are much greater. But then also, of course, special events. All kinds of special events in a community happen in churches. Okay, just a way of illustrating the point of the safety net, okay? 87% of beneficiaries of community programs are non-members of church communities. That's striking. That's, again, why Partners is non-sectarian. It's all about serving communities through historical sacred places. I'll skip over this one. Here's the slide. If you'll notice the bottom figure there, this is going to be an average amount for urban congregations, as you're looking at it on the left, twice the number of economic contribution to the community than a rural church community on average. It's important because Most of the churches we're serving in this Central Appalachia project are rural. Okay? Here's some examples. I'll just breeze through these, but these are also found on the partners website, and also I think some of them are profiled in this magazine that you're welcome to take a copy about. Their Partners for Sacred Places conducted a very extensive study of North Carolina churches a few years back, and this is some of the data from 3 sample churches. It's really relevant if you compare and contrast them based on where they are in the state, but we don't have time to do that. We want to concentrate on Appalachia here and on folk art, so I'll breeze through these. This is our project in Central Appalachia. It's called Preserving Cultural Heritage in Appalachia's Sacred Places. Here's our advisory committee. Some of these names you may recognize. I mean, these are important people in the realm of religious studies, folk arts, scholarship, Appalachian studies. There's a state senator from North Carolina on this list, and others, church leaders as well. So it's a wonderful group of people, and maybe you know some of them, but I've enjoyed getting to know all of them. Here are the program elements for the Central Appalachia Project. Training, asset mapping, churches finding out what their assets are. I mean, they know what they are, but mapping them out and tracing their potential impacts and really how relevant they are to their broader community. Planning grants. We try to help church communities. We provide a 2-for-1 match so they can do planning grants and figure out exactly how to go about historical preservation in their church, their sacred places. Projects, we have capital project funding, 1-to-1 match. So they have to fundraise. We give them half of that, up to $15,000, towards helping them with capital restoration projects, based on the advice given through the planning grants. So those two are tied. Documentation, one of the most enjoyable aspects in my involvement in this project. I'm a field representative to Partners in Philadelphia since I'm based in Johnson City, is I go to these places, they're all part of our cohort, and I help them to design kind of a documentation strategy so that they can document their story. Key activities and dates. You can see this is pretty well in the past, but in all disclosure, we're a very friendly organization in terms of serving our churches. And projects conclude May 2023. We have actually 2 of our churches still working to this time. We did extend their due date for their capital project grants by 1 year, so there are a couple of them that are still active in their capital grant work. Here's our first cohort, and as you look at it, we call it Central Appalachia because our funder calls it Central Appalachia. As anyone knows with the ARC boundaries and the mapping on the ARC website, technically some of these are in the southern Appalachian region. So not to get technical about which part of Appalachia, let's just concentrate on the fact that these are in 4 states of Appalachia. Western North Carolina, East Tennessee, all of West Virginia, and Eastern Kentucky. Why not Southwest Virginia? It's because of the funder's request. And it has something to do with, I think, grant politics, and I can't answer why or why not, but it is, living very close to Southwest Virginia, I'd love to see Southwest Virginia part of this program, but we're not excluding them at the partners level for sure. So you see the list there. That's where they're located. I guess I have a pointer here. The furthest one up is let's see here. That's the Union Presbyterian Church. And then we have, no, I'm sorry, that's Parkersburg right there. That's Union Presbyterian Church. Parkersburg is not an outlier. It's a very important central part of our first cohort, an African-American church that you'll get to know shortly. All the way down here is, close to Chattanooga, is Christ Church Episcopal in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee. And then, of course, we have about, maybe 1, 2, I think there are 6 or 7 of them in Western North Carolina. And that was not favoring Western North Carolina. It was just the way the applications fell in. So You'll just briefly get to know the individual places. I do want to spend the last bit of time on the folk arts initiative that we have affiliated with this first cohort and our second cohort. Pine Mountain Settlement School, very famous settlement school in Appalachia. Very beautiful campus, Eastern Kentucky based near Harlan, way up on Pine Mountain. And it's a gorgeous setting. It has a beautiful chapel designed by a female architect in the early 20th century. It was architect design, but it has many aspects of folk art within its structure inside in terms of the contributions of local crafters and craftspeople. So I imagine you probably know about Pine Mountain. It's a beautiful facility, very important to its community in Eastern Kentucky. Cross Nora Presbyterian Church, another part of our first cohort, featured in Alan Eaton's early book on Appalachian folk arts. A very important church in Appalachia's history. And they're part of our cohort because they have extensive capital needs and they have a dynamic leadership. So they're not only a part of our cohort, our immediate cohort, but they're also part of the National Fund, another funding source from Partners for Sacred Places. So they're very hardworking, enterprising, and well-connected, and they were able to get both grants simultaneously. But they needed, because of the extensive funding necessary to repair a profoundly damaged roof on this beautiful hand-built church. The river rock came from the Linville River, brought up by ox cart from the river in the early 1920s. A country church on the edge of Winston-Salem on the far side of the Appalachian Regional Commission boundary for Appalachia. Germantown United Methodist Church, known for its beautiful, let's highlight it, altar painting. Some would say it's a fresco. They call it an altar painting. This is a student of the great Ben Long, and a lot of you know Ben Long, the great altar painter in Western North Carolina. Well, this is his student, Gerald Steinmeier. And here's a church community with very few people in their congregation, but they want to survive, and that's why they joined our cohort. And they've had some success in building tourism to bring money into the church coffers, people streaming in to see this beautiful altar painting. Harshaw Chapel. This is very close to the Georgia line. This is in Murphy, North Carolina, near the John C. Campbell Folk School, and they have a partnership with John C. Campbell for their folk arts work that we'll get to. This is the mother church for Methodists in extreme southwestern North Carolina. And what to say? Oh, interesting fact. In their cemetery is buried one Abraham Enlow. If you know the name, you know where I'm going with this. But there's a myth, probably not based on biological fact, but there's a myth that Abraham Lincoln's father is Abraham Enlow, buried in this cemetery. It's local mythology. It's probably not supportable by biological evidence, but it's a broad myth across Western North Carolina. That's one of their points of tourism that brings people to that church house. Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church, Mars Hill, North Carolina. African American church, very small congregation near Mars Hill University. They have a lot of support from Mars Hill University, I want to point out, through a Mars Hill leader named Tommy Justice. If you know Tommy, he's a dynamic leader, but he's helped to guide partners. And this small community has done amazing work with their planning grant and capital grant. They're all finished with their work through us, but they're looking for the next phase. Just down the road, about half a mile from this black community in Mars Hill, North Carolina, is a Rosenwald school that they're restoring, that has been largely restored, but it's a very important part of bringing back kind of an awareness, regional awareness of the important history of this community. Old Mother Church, another mother church. This is a mother church for Graham County, North Carolina. And it's Robbinsville, of course. Robbinsville is in Graham County. Graham County has, for North Carolina, one of the lower economic situations across the state in terms of average income and whatnot. They do an amazing job recognizing the geographical issues that they deal with in terms of geographical isolation. They don't present themselves as socially isolated, but they do stress that they have a hard time bringing tourists there. They're doing this restoration in part to try to bring more tourism to that part of North Carolina, which is, by the way, very close to the Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest, which is a lovely stand of never-before-cut timber, more than 10,000 acres. So that's really one of their big tourist draws, as well as the Skyway Road that goes through Graham County. Okay, this is an example of a sacred place that we're serving through this project that is not a functioning church building. This is simply a room in a house that at one point saw a one-time preaching by the great Methodist circuit rider named Francis Asbury in the early part of the 19th century. So he showed up here, gave us a sermon here, and made the locals kind of excited about Methodism. He moved on, never came back, but they are preserving that room for posterity. It has been more than 200 years, and they're restoring this room through the grant that they're receiving from us, Clyde, North Carolina, and Haywood County. Christ Church, South Pittsburgh, Tennessee. Here's an interesting aspect as you look at this. They restored their bell tower, which was rotting, and with the funds from our capital fund that we provided them, they restored that bell tower. Now the bell is ringing across the village of South Pittsburgh. Interesting example of how a local corporation is intervening and providing matching seed money for partners funds is that the corporation that matched the funds for this work was the Lodge Company, making fry pans and this sort of thing, the great company that's internationally renowned for their ironwork. Logan Memorial University. I'm probably running out of time, I think. Okay, I'll race through these, but I do want you to see the folk art projects. We have two more churches, I think. Logan Memorial United Methodist Church, Parkersburg, West Virginia. There's a picture later, and you can kind of see it on the very edge here, is that the railroad company built a bridge right next to it, which shakes the rafters of this African-American church and has caused arguably some internal structural damage. To have friendly relations in the community, they don't stress that fact. So they're trying to win over the local community leaders to keep them invested in providing local economic support for this church. There was a point at which a hospital, which is on the left side as you're looking at it, you can't see it, was going to tear down this church. Church leader, very small congregation, under 10 are now worshiping here. But they got together and they worked through partners and through the local media and have made a commitment to preserve the church by any means possible. A lot of that has to do with the dynamic young leadership that has emerged within the otherwise more elderly congregation. 2 or 3 younger members of the church community are actively fundraising beyond partners, and partners is assisting them in that process towards fundraising, utilizing local media to get the word out. Here's one that for every success story, there's a failure, and this is not a failure on necessarily partners' part, except for, I suppose, we were never able to mobilize an active local congregation to serve this extremely important sacred place. And so this was, of the 10 in our first cohort, this one fell out early in the process. We were not able to give them any funds, which is very sad to me, but it was, it's the kind of the foundational church in Methodism in West Virginia. Okay, folk art. These are some highlight features from Central Appalachia, Southern Appalachia, depends on how you define it, but from our church area that we're serving. Obviously, these are religious paintings and frescoes. I mentioned Ben Long before. Ben's right here. Have some of you been on the fresco trail in Western North Carolina? It's incredible, and Ben's work graces that trail. Here, of course, is Gerald Steinmeier, the student of this master. And then here is an older religious painting in Blowing Rock, North Carolina. Elliot Dangerfield, St. Mary's of the Hills, Episcopal Church in Blowing Rock, that you can all see. If you read one of Jan Karen's books, she fictionalizes this church in those wonderful, that novel series. Stained glass windows. Just some examples. You know how these things are always in flux. This window apparently is now in Versailles, central Kentucky. It was relocated from Leslie County, Kentucky, but it belonged for years to the Frontier Nursing Service, which for years was based in Wendover. But then the group moved to central Kentucky to be more centrally located to their mission. Their mission has changed. They formerly were serving midwifery in central Appalachia, locally speaking, but they've kind of changed some of their mission. They've moved their service, and they've also taken that away. So that's just give you a sense of how volatile a lot of this folk art is in the region. And then here's some other, stained glass creations that you can look at, one of which is in St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Asheville. The other is at the church we just looked at in Parkersburg. Okay, very quickly here, stone masonry. We saw a church made by hand. That was Crossnor Presbyterian. Here are some other interiors, and obviously the lower one is from this here, is Crossnor Presbyterian. The upper one on the left, as you're looking at it, is stone masonry in the background in affiliation with Pine Mountain Settlement School. Folk artisans working with the designed architect, the professional architect. They created this incredible chapel that they're part of our cohort. Here's an interesting, just a little tidbit. This is in eastern Kentucky. Oh, I'm sorry, right here. You see some stones that have a kind of an intentional design. These are Italian stonemasons, and they're representing their homeland, Italy, in stone here. And this is in Graham Memorial Presbyterian Church in Whitesburg, Kentucky. So all folk art kind of has a message embedded in it. Here, woodworking. Here's the great church in Buckhorn Lake area, Presbyterian Church. It's a mammoth church. It's utterly special and beautiful. We held a recent meeting, partners did, training our second cohort of churches in that very building right there. So we kind of brought a new set of church leaders to visit a very important site on the landscape of churches in eastern Kentucky. Woodworking. This one here at the top is that is Christ Church Episcopal in South Pittsburgh, and this other one is from Franklin, North Carolina. These are just examples, and some of them we served with our first cohort, and some of them are just stellar examples of folk arts tradition in sacred places in Appalachia, just as illustration point. Only one of these three churches here visible here did we serve in our first cohort, and that of course was Harshaw Chapel, which is this one here. These other two, this illustrates deterioration, and this is the kind of thing we look for when we try to identify churches to invite to apply. We want to help them. We want to not only give them money, but we want to give them training, and that's an extremely important part of this program in Central Appalachia. So we contact, one of my jobs in Central, being based here, is driving around, finding churches, meeting the church leaders, letting them know about our project, and encouraging them to apply. Sometimes that works. During the pandemic, I couldn't really visit them in person, but I did contact a lot of people by internet and by phone. And then other sorts of traditions affiliated with churches in our region. I mean, this one here, this one here, National Cornbread Festival attracts 30,000 people every year in South Pittsburgh, sponsored by the Lodge Company. You can see the fry pan. A tremendous festival. It is sponsored in part by Lodge and also in part by Christ Church Episcopal, one of the churches in our cohort. I had the distinct pleasure, honor of being present last April when they held the Cornbread Festival there, to be at the table associated with Christ Church Episcopal, handing out samples of cornbread to the tens of thousands of people streaming by. I was a very popular person for that role, because they got to taste 4 or 5 different types of cornbread at that event. But in all seriousness, it was very heartening to see the people of Christ Church Episcopal serving the public in action. And we passed out a lot of literature while they streamed by to get the free cornbread samples. It was a delightful experience. And then, of course, other types of religious related folk traditions, including dinner on the grounds, and share with you another couple of examples. A good friend of mine, Jeff Todd Titan, did the production of this album here, Songs of the Old Regular Baptist from Eastern Kentucky, from a community that he got to know as a researcher. And this is lined out hymnody, which is a particular kind of religious song where religious texts are conveyed through song. And then on the right, of course, shape note singing. And one of our cohort churches is Shook Smathers' house in Clyde, North Carolina. This is Quay Smathers, who has maintained a sacred harp tradition his family has for generations, and they still maintain those traditions today and have sacred harp singings every year in that space that's part of our cohort, that you saw the photo of the cross in the 3rd floor sacred space, part of that community building there, the oldest building in Haywood County, North Carolina. So, questions and answers. I hope I have the answers. Yeah.
Are you working with any, I'm glad that you mentioned the Old Regular Baptist. It seems like a lot of the churches or sacred spaces that are being represented are mainline churches that aren't necessarily like Appalachian in origin. But like, so Old Regular Baptist, are you doing anything with like the newer, like the late 19th century Great Awakening, like charismatic Christianity, holiness, like Pentecostal? Like, are you going to preserve stake handling churches?
In our second cohort, we're serving currently, let's see, Bethany Church, which is Disciples of Christ, which is an Appalachian, not specifically, but their national headquarters are in Appalachia. So that's one example of a regionally specific church community that we're serving. That's a very good question. We approached, the holiness churches and the Pentecostal churches, and they were invited to apply. Yeah. And we've only gotten one application, and it wasn't one where there was a defined leadership situation. We were approached by more than one, though, in terms of they're interested in knowing more. And please understand, I guess, is an important corollary to this, is even if they don't apply, they still have developed communications, and they know that there's a source of help for them. So that's all part of the conversations that we have with them. I probably didn't make the point emphatic enough, but we have a second cohort of 10 churches now that we're servicing through this project. We have a separate folk arts grant where we're encouraging, this definitely relates to the themes of this gathering. We are encouraging 4 churches, we're giving them seed money to commission new folk art modeled on traditional folk art for 4 separate church communities in Central Appalachia. So, for example, Pine Mountain Settlement School is commissioning one of their blacksmiths to create sconces for installation in that chapel. And it will be modeled on traditional Appalachian sconces that have been in existence at that church in the past that had deteriorated. So that's an example of how the folk art works. When you say new folk art, it gets into some debate about definitions. But we keep the definition loose and serviceable.
Does Partners then support training for those local craftspeople to go to places like the Charleston Building School to learn how to incorporate maybe say their smithing traditions into traditional building, like the modern building preservation sort of methods, right? So that you can take the blacksmithing that you know and then incorporate some more modern ideas about historic press into that?
We have collaborated with John C. Campbell Folk School, and they are undertaking a lot of the training and definitional issues. So we had a Zoom meeting with these recipients, and they were talking directly to practitioners and leaders at John C. Campbell in our webinar. And we took a back seat to some of that because, in all truthfulness, that's their dialogue. And we're also going to, Pine Mountain Settlement School is taking care of it on its own, since it has its own quorum of folk artists on board. Yeah.